Hey, everybody. Welcome back to, I'm not sure what number in our series of conversations with important people in the world of professional beauty. We've had the opportunity to interview quite a few people, but probably nobody as memorable in terms of their accomplishments as the barber we're going to interview today. Most of you probably have heard of or seen Ivan. Ivan Zoot has all kinds of cool things, but the coolest thing that I remember is he has a Guinness Book of World Records holder. And he's laughing because that's not the coolest thing he's ever done. So how are you, Ivan?
I'm not nearly as cool as some people think I am.
Okay, well, just let me keep thinking that. How about that?
Yeah, just ask my kids, I'll tell you.
So one thing I do know about Ivan is I actually got a phone call on Friday from somebody in Scotland who said, "Oh, I know Ivan." And it seems to be a pretty universal name because if you've ever heard the name Ivan Zoot, you'll always remember that name. But also because Ivan has done a lot for the world of barbering. And it's really had a full reach all around the world. So since we're in the middle of this sort of worldwide issue right now, the pandemic, it's a really great time to have you on and talk about some of the things going on in barbering. So
Thank you.
how are things in your world?
Things in my world are always interesting. And as you mentioned, sort of a world perspective on this, narrowing it down to a little bit of maybe just to some America for starters. I think it's New York that is actually coming online today as we're recording this with barbershops and hair salons and California is getting into play here. There are some states that, never shut down. And there are some states like Illinois that have been back to work, Illinois where I live, a few weeks. So with a lot of my contacts and relationships, it's been interesting to see, who's back at it, how they're feeling about what's going on, who is chomping at the bit to get back, and who's had a little bit of experience now and can share some of the realities of what's happening at client service level in the business. For so long, for so many weeks with lockout, lockdown, shutdown, whatever you want to call it, it's been a lot of talking about how it will be and hypothesizing and kicking around ideas for what procedures, processes, products we need to be using. But all of a sudden, the governor says go, and it became very real for a lot of people in a hurry. In some cases with maybe even less notice than might have been ideal for despite the fact that people were locked out for a while. All of a sudden they're told, 5 o'clock tomorrow, you can go. And then it became a scramble. So it's been interesting, scary for some, anxiety producing for others, for a lot of people just getting back to generating a little bit of revenue to keep family eating and warm and or cool as the electricity may be, has just been so critically important. So there's been a lot going on.
So what do you see as having been the biggest changes in the barbering industry with the reopening after the pandemic? And which of those changes do you think will be permanent, and which ones do you think might fade away over time?
That's a great
Crystal
question.
ball.
Biggest change I think now, and I think it's going to be a permanent change, is that we are now in a situation in which our client is so much more educated, aware, and concerned about sanitation and infection control than they have ever been.
Mm-hmm.
It's a client-driven aspect of it. We've all seen on Facebook comments from people saying, hey, I went in my salon and nobody's wearing masks and I'm not comfortable there and I'm not going back. Having nothing to do maybe with what the government regulations are in that particular area, or what is or isn't right, wrong, proper, mandated, dictated, recommended. A lot of that doesn't matter, because it really in these cases comes down to the attitude, the perspective, the comfort level, and the optics from the client side. I don't think that's ever going to go away now, even post-COVID. I think if Barbicide, as an example, was not a household name before, and I think for a large measure of America, the blue jar with the liquid in it was absolutely recognized and understood by people who were secretaries and welders and lawyers, and you didn't have to have a barber license to know what that jar was and what it was for. The knowledge of, hey, I'm just not comfortable with the way this shop looks from a sanitation standpoint. That's going to be a issue, a trend, a reality that haircut professionals are going to have to deal with from this point forward. So that's a biggie.
Okay. And I know you're big on helping train people how to maximize their income in this industry. And it feels like, from what I'm hearing, that some of that people are worried about that based on um, how they're going to have to work. If they have a barbershop that had 6 barbers in it, maybe now they can only have 3, or they have to work 7 days a week. What's your advice? What are you telling barbers out there about how they can, really get back to work and do it safely within the rules, but still maximize their income?
Well, I'm so glad you asked it early on in the conversation, because it lets me jump into what right now is my number one conversation. About 12 years ago, I created a holiday. I'm not sure if you're aware you can create your own holidays, but I created a holiday. My holiday, it's our holiday. I don't own it. July 1 is Raise Your Haircut Prices Day in the USA. And it's a movement I've tried to create initially out of my passion for helping beauty and barber professionals elevate their incomes, their industry, and everything that we do. It has a heightened sense of urgency today because, as you alluded to, in going back to work in the world in which we find ourselves, issues of no waiting rooms, issues of increased focus on sanitation between clients have brought about, no question, a decrease in our productive capacity, in our productivity. The number one answer to your question with regards to getting back to work in a highly productive manner is we, the industry, we have got to charge more. We have to charge more because our expenses are up. It's a blessing, but thankfully, all of a sudden the industry learned, I was supposed to dump that barbicide every day. And I was, maybe dumping it once a week. Well, if you're now following the rules, you're buying more barbicide. Okay, masks, PPE. If you had to buy a plexiglass panel at your front desk, if you had to go to a touchless POS terminal for accepting credit cards, all of these things represent increased costs. And I have been, hopefully a supportive and helpful, but a broken record in the industry about pressing haircut professionals to be able to answer the question, how much does it cost you to do a haircut? How much does it, knowing your accounting metrics, knowing your cost structure, knowing these are my monthly expenses divided by my productive capacity gives me my cost per haircut, knowing the basic accounting of our business. Well, the bottom line is, if you know those numbers, as we sit here today, that number went up. If it cost you and approximately, if you're running a really good haircutting establishment, forget about hair color and some of its associated costs or skincare and nails, but just with the focus on haircutting, generally speaking, if you're running well, you should be able to deliver a haircut somewhere in the area of $4 cost per haircut service. That's, we're talking everything from laundry detergent to maintenance on the fire extinguisher, your total costs at about $4 per haircut. That number is up. As a result, your haircut number has to go up to be productive. You also need systems. When we talk about managing the flow of customers in a non-walk-in environment, because so many areas have mandated, let's get away from the waiting room, let's get away from a group of people. And by the way, a waiting room and a group of people is so ingrained in the DNA and the culture of what barbering and men's haircutting is, that this is a severe culture shock, and that could be a whole nother episode of conversation for you and I. But as we get away from that waiting room way of doing business, I go back to Ray Kroc didn't build McDonald's by figuring out how to make the best hamburgers. Ray Kroc built McDonald's by figuring systems to produce hamburgers effectively and efficiently. It comes down to systems, whether it's the systems by which you manage the flow of your traffic, the systems by which you execute your sanitation activities. And when I mentioned that, one thing that ties back to that issue of client optics, I've always used the expression get caught sanitizing. That anything you do in the realm of disinfection or sanitizing that you do after hours and in the back room, we still all appreciate that you did it, but you have compromised so much of the marketing value, if you will. There's huge value in killing pathogenic microorganisms, don't get me wrong, but there's even more value in killing pathogenic microorganisms with witnesses. It's the only you want to do with a group of witnesses.
I've constantly said that. I think I said that when you interviewed me, which is demonstrate what you're doing to make someone safer. If that is because you're a barber, you have a sink that you wash your hands in front of me right when I'm sitting in the chair, or you spray your clippers with disinfectant right while I'm still sitting in the chair. Those are the things that actually make those optics that actually I do think allow you to charge that premium price today. I think July 1st is the ideal time to raise your rates, because one of the things that has been a conversation in my own home is going out the first time to get haircuts, hair colors, all of those kinds of things. Whether or not we felt good about that experience. I don't know if you've seen it, but there was a survey that was released maybe 2 months ago now, and they asked Americans, what are the things you're most afraid to go back to do? And the only thing they're more afraid of than getting their haircut was getting on an airplane. Getting their haircut was really an angst driven exercise. They had to do it, but they were afraid to do it. So to your point, if you can demonstrate for me how safe it is to come and do it, I can sit down and I can enjoy it, and I might be willing to pay that premium price. So that was a good point.
And I think that there's a couple reasons there. I think if you analyze it, there's no question that the news media and a lot of what's going out there that consumers have been exposed to has kind of drummed into people this notion of the very close personal contact. I heard it described that the haircutting business has a very low ability to maintain social distance and very high capability to transmit. So it's kind of like the ultimate combo of badliness with regards to potential for this. So I think that's been drummed into people. And the other side of it is, I think we've all found ourselves in a beauty or barber situation at some point in the past in our pre-COVID lives, in which we have experienced some discomfort with what we've seen from a sanitation standpoint, even if it's stuff like walking into a barbershop and seeing neck strips on the floor, which in and of itself isn't something that's going to get me sick. But to me, it's always been one, I'm no Michael Jordan. I can throw a wadded up neck strip at a garbage can 7 times. I can miss it 6.5 times. But every time I can walk over, pick it up, and put it in the can after I miss the long jump shot. So I think it's so important that we recognize that we've maybe been our own worst enemy in the past in terms of some of our attitudes, and even maybe the idea that there's been such a wide range in what I'll call sanitation compliance within the industry. Everything from that neighborhood barber shop that we just know is a hot spot to, for instance, maybe a chain salon that because of the corporate oversight, and there was a time in my life in which I worked with a chain in a franchise compliance role, and I was one of those guys kind of partially responsible for cracking the whip on some sanitation compliance. So you walk into maybe a chain salon, you go, wow, it looks really clean in here, and you're taken by the difference. So that's an issue.
Yeah. So one of the things, there are 2 things that I've been hearing a lot when I'm doing barber type conversations. One, I think I know your answer to, but I want to ask you about it, it comes up quite frequently, which is the idea of charging a surcharge, like a COVID surcharge, for all of the costs, in my mind, of doing what you should have been doing anyway, right? And so to me, you charging me a COVID surcharge says you're doing something new. I mean, other than the mask and the gloves, you're doing something new that you weren't doing before. I would be more in favor of them just raising their price, but I want to hear your thoughts on that COVID surcharge.
Yeah, that's my position on it. I think twofold. Number one, for the reasons that you've outlined. Number two, just like, I, for many, many years of business travel, used a, car service to drive me to and from the airport. And several years ago, when gasoline went bananas, as I'm sure you've experienced yourself, they instituted a fuel surcharge. Well, I understood it. I didn't gripe about it. But in the back of my head, I said, as soon as gas drops, it's going away. Okay, now you and I can order a cup of coffee, sit around and wait for the surcharge to go away. And when gas comes down under $2 and the surcharge hasn't gone away, now we feel like we're being taken advantage of. So I think the surcharge is not the ideal way to go, because everybody expects it'll be repealed. I think a price increase is justified, called for, necessary, legitimate, and as a price increase, the new price, we go up 10%. We were charging 28, we go up to 31, and we have nothing left to talk about. It's over.
Right, exactly. So another question that I've been asked multiple times is about consistency and standardization, so to speak, really across the country, but even within somebody's own place of business. Whether or not we can get consistency from state to state on rules like around masks in particular. I mean, masks have become somehow a political issue, and for me, they're just a public health issue. If there's a chance they're going to work, I want to wear a mask. But when you go into a place where let's say half the people are wearing masks, maybe all of the barbers are wearing masks, but there's a option for the people, the customers coming in to wear a mask. How do you feel about that? I feel like for me, as a consumer, I mean, I'm not asking you a political question even. I'm just saying as a consumer, when I come in, I feel like I wear a mask because I want to protect everyone in there just in case I'm sick. Even if I'm going to get sick tomorrow, or I'm going to go home tonight and start running that fever, that type of thing. I just want to be extra safe. But it feels unfair to me, and that's the word I'm just going to pick. It feels unfair to me if the owner of that business is allowing other people not to do that, right? If we're all trying to do something together, how do you feel about that in terms of, look, they're trying to keep their businesses going. What should there be a standard that they keep in their own barbershop, or should they only rely on what the rules are of the state?
First of all, I would love to see more and more of our industry at every level and in every circumstance standardized. I'm a big believer that we grow by playing within structure, having rules. So we all know, you got to remember, I've had small children, mine are grown. So I've raised children. I've also been a child, and at times I've been accused of not getting too far from it. I'm keenly aware of the fact that people love to test the boundaries. And if there is latitude, if there is room for choice in some of these things, not everyone is going to choose well. Not everyone is well informed enough to make the best choices on their own about some of these things. And I think it comes down to ownership and management responsibility. I have seen online where a stylist or a barber posts that, we got a mask rule in our shop. We got a client that comes in and says they can't wear a mask because of a health reason. Or one that was crazy the other day, somebody said that they had a client come in who said they cannot wear a mask in the barber shop because of religious reasons. And I thought it was funny. And I said, when I first read this, I thought it was a joke because I'm not aware of, and I'm not going to claim to be, that religiously aware, but I'm not aware of a religion that would prevent you from wearing one. But my simple answer was, bye-bye, house rules. You're not getting a haircut here. And it's not discrimination, and it's not illegal, and it's these are the rules we have here. And I could get on a soapbox here when it comes to the issue of whether it's a commission salon where an owner or manager has a greater degree of leverage over what team members do and don't do versus a booth or chair rental establishment where technically the relationship is landlord and tenant. And under those circumstances, there's very little legal leverage that the owner, and he's not really an owner, the language becomes important there. He's a landlord, and no different than if I rent an apartment, a landlord can't tell me I have to wear a mask in my apartment. In a barber shop with 8 rental stations, I think you would be hard pressed to justify telling all the employees and all the customers they had to wear masks, because all of a sudden you start to run afoul of the legal guidelines for what does or doesn't constitute dictating the way an independent individual performs their tasks as a tenant. So I think there are some legal lines there that get a little bit uncomfortable for some folks. So I fall back on know and understand the type of business that you're running. And if you are running a business with employees, you have every right and you have a lot of reason to dictate these things, make them mandatory and not make them subject to the whims of an individual's choice.
So you brought up an interesting thing, which I want to touch on. I read an article just over the weekend. They were talking about the hair industry, and not really about barbers so much, but they were talking about one group that is really making out like bandits in terms of surges in their business are the salon suite models, right? The one-on-one. I come and I'm just with you, and when we're done, somebody else comes. Basically, because there aren't those questions anymore, right? It's just you and I making our own agreement that we're both going to wear masks. We're going to be in this one space with not a whole lot of people, because the conversation right now in the healthcare world is um, it's not just do you have it, it's how long am I around you, so the duration of time and the distance, how close am I to you. So what do you see that taking off in the barber world, or do you think that the social structure of the barbershop is so strong that you won't see as many barbers go towards that sort of sweet single person approach? You know what I'm
Suite
saying?
rental is it's not a phenomenon, and it's not a trend anymore. It's the reality of our business. It has been migrating over time from the West Coast, where it really has its origins, through to the East Coast of the country. There are places on the East Coast in which chair or suite rental situations are not even yet legal within our industry. So it's coming. It is the reality of the independent gig economy that millennials and Zoomers are growing up into and are not going to accept anything else. You know, as we get to a point where Zoomers and millennials are forcing out of the beauty industry just through aging and retirement, boomers and Xers, they're not going to want to be employees. They're going to want to be independent, whether it's chair rent or suite rent. Suite rent is flourishing. It is growing. It's going to continue to grow. I'm actually a part of a Facebook group that is specifically dedicated to conversations for the suite rental community. It has positives and negatives. You would certainly be able to speak to it more knowledgeably as it relates to the sanitation aspect of it, because yes, it's just the two of us, but we're in a box. Are we rebreathing all the same nasty? So I don't know the good answers on that, but I do know that independence in our industry requires much more than just good technical hair skills. You got to be a marketer. You got to be an accountant. You got to run your business. You have to take full responsibility for every aspect of what it means to run a business. That is not the case if you're a commission barber in a barbershop. That is not the case if you're an employee in a chain salon. So it's a widely different skill set. I've made the statement that I don't think anyone should consider suite rental under any circumstances with less than 3 to 5 years experience in the industry. I also, and I get a little bit of interesting debate on this when I speak of it online, but when you make the jump from a barbershop or hair salon to a suite situation, you need to expect to lose as much as 50% of your traffic for all of the reasons associated with making a switch, plus issues of, whether it's distance or not liking that one-on-one or wanting that barbershop type culture and things like that. So you really, in order to successfully need to make the jump, you need to be a lot busier than you think you need to be. So those are some of the general considerations. I think barbers, to answer the second piece of your question, I think a busy barber, a guy or a girl in the barbering end of the business that's in a conventional shop environment that has a large active base of customers, I think moving to a suite situation, and I have lots of friends that work and relationships in the industry that work in that way, I think it still works, but it's not a barbershop. A barbershop is inherently a social experience. There are some barbershops out there with a layout model in which the individual chairs have half-height walls segregating those stations from one another. That provides a little bit of privacy. For instance, that was common at times in hair replacement or shops that did a lot of men's hair color where there was a desire for a greater degree of discretion. However, as soon as you put that half-height wall up, the clients can't really engage with one another, and the barbers don't do a whole lot of yelling over the little wall I would argue it's no longer a barber shop. You know, we have one of those in our community, and it's a haircutting establishment. They are barbers. They have a pole out front, but not by any measure that I can relate to would I call that a barbering experience.
So you and I have had some conversations about that barbering experience. And one of the things that has been a great idea in my mind that you and I have been kind of tossing around is how a barber, because of that relationship you now have with your clients, they sit there, or you're telling me this is that social environment. And I recognize that for men, there aren't a lot of those social environments where you sit and you have those conversations. Women seem to find those conversations in other ways. And so to disrupt that saddens me a little bit. I know that we're going to see some of that have to be disrupted. You can't sit around and talk like you would, years ago, 6 months ago, even. But the idea that a barber might be the first line, I know you're the first line to detect, let's say, skin cancer on a man's head, right? You're the only one, looking at his scalp, and you might see something and send him to the doctor and he might turn out to have skin cancer. Do you think that there might be a space for more conversations around men's health at the barber shop at that chair level, so that men would be more likely? One of the things you and I have conversed about is that men of color are so much more likely to end up having bad outcomes with COVID-19. There's a lot of reasons why that might be, but one of the reasons that as a nurse I can identify is that men of color, men over 50 period, are not as likely to go to a doctor as their female counterparts. But certainly in certain communities, it's even less likely. You don't go to the doctor unless you feel sick. But do you think that's something that, in the hair industry for women, they've taken on sort of some training for women to learn about domestic violence, right? For stylists to learn that, so that if I sit in the chair and I say certain things, they might be able to direct me to some resources. Do you think the same thing could happen in the barbering community around healthcare issues that might make men less able to handle things like COVID-19, for example?
I mean, the answer is absolutely yes. That's my short answer, but I'm not good at short answers. The longer answer is there have been, and I've been exposed to throughout my career, there's a history of some initiatives, specifically in the Black community, to train barbers to, not to be a doctor and not to be a diagnostician, if that's the word. I made up a word if it isn't the word. But to train barbers to, for instance, pass out literature on hypertension, to share literature on diabetes screenings. There was an initiative a few years back, and again, because of the higher level of risk in the Black community, I know these efforts at the time were focused within the Black barbershop community as opposed to the general market, to, for instance, have days where a qualified medical professional was present in a barbershop to participate in conversations and pass out literature. And, in so many cases, a barber has been maybe the singular, strong, reliable, consistent male influence in a young Black man's life. Maybe a dad wasn't present. Maybe you got a young guy that's being raised by a mom and a grandma or an older sister. But the barber was that Black man who was reliable, accountable, dependable, honest, who was modeling some of the better virtues we look to instill in our children and in our families and things like that. That barbershops really became an opportunity for this. Certainly in this COVID situation, I think I've referenced with you, I have a friend in the UK who pioneered a program to train barbers to engage in conversations about men's mental health issues. He's been very successful with a program to provide what we'll call suicide intervention or mental health intervention skills, things like that. That is, there are some folks dedicating careers to some of that kind of stuff, and represents a huge opportunity within the barber community. That is, no question, that opportunity is challenged or stressed by the potential loss of the social element that the barbershop represents. That if there was good ground to be made in that regard, some of that good ground can be lost if we lose walk-in traffic, if we lose the waiting room as it exists, and some things like that. So yeah, that represents some real opportunity.
Yeah, I really look forward to working on some of that going down the road. Just from a, being a nurse, the whole healthcare aspect of what could benefit somebody in the long run. If one person in your barbershop, found out that they did have hypertension, they did have diabetes, and they did get it treated, just that one person would make it totally worth it. So,
well, I think there's examples we can take from some of what's going on the ladies' side of the business. When you reference domestic violence, there are programs that I'm aware of in providing domestic violence resources where they do things like they have flyers on the back of bathroom stall doors and very subtly, they have code words out there that people use that, for instance, like in the bar industry, in the alcohol industry, if a young woman is being harassed in a bar, there's a code for a drink she can order that is an indication that, hey, I'm in a challenged situation here, I need help. And bartenders and food service professionals are trained to know these things and pick up on these cues. There are things like that can be done. I've always imagined that, for instance, when it comes to things like diabetes and hypertension in the barber industry, posters that address these things that maybe even had some branded sponsorship from some corporations that wanted to invest in the printing and distribution of those things in exchange for the awareness that those posters would generate for not only these important social concerns, but also their brands with the co-branding element of it.
Great idea that we will be working on with you. So last but not least, I know you've been working on a lot of things. You're always so busy, but you've been doing some things. You're rolling out some classes. I'm interested to hear what you're doing now in this new world we're in. So
COVID-19 has changed the game for me. So much of my business was dependent upon my ability to interact with folks at trade shows. Talk about a hot spot petri dish. I don't know that I will ever be presented with the opportunity again to participate in a viable trade show. And I choose that word because I think there are some folks in our industry that are going to try to put on some shows. I don't know if anyone's going to attend. I don't know if they will have any money to spend if they do. Trade shows have been compromised in our industry for a while. So Ivan has been big on some reinvention. I introduced a new book this year. 100 by 100 is 100 new haircut customers in 100 days. Day by day, step by step program, guaranteed. Any day can be day one. 99 days later, you're looking at 100 new haircut customers. And everything in the book is what I would call COVID proof. Not by intention or design, because the book was well underway long before we had this situation on our hands. But I went to an online mode. I do classes in the mornings. Through the lockout, I was doing at one point 2 and 3 a day. As people have gotten back to work and back to school, I've scaled down the numbers of those. And what's interesting is the number of people that are attending the classes live has dropped. And the number of people watching the classes on replay has shot up because now people are doing it. It's like Hulu. You do it when it's convenient for you, which great. I get it. But I've kind of shifted to an online mode. I have a website, of course, ivanzoot.com. There's links there to things like my online community through a Patreon site where I provide my engagement and my coaching. And really, it's right now, seasonally, we're in this price conversation mode because of July 1, Raise Your Haircut Prices Day in the USA, our haircutter holiday. But those conversations evolve into, I think there's lots of conversation coming as it relates to recruiting. A lot of haircutters, as we are opening up, are finding that they are not comfortable going back to where they used to work for all kinds of reasons. Their own fears about contracting COVID, or their concerns about their employer's ability to comply with good and reasonable measures, or businesses that, quite frankly, didn't survive the shutdown and are not opening back up. So there's lots of web chatter right now on either recruiting, which is one side of that discussion, or seeking employment, which, is its partnered twin. That's really a big emerging source of engagement online right now. And I have some, as you would always imagine, I've got some strong opinions and some ideas. And some of my ideas are even good as to what to do.
Well, Ivan, I got to say, it's shocking from two very opinionated people how well we actually always get along. And we bounce ideas off each other a lot, which I really appreciate. You really know your business, and I think I know my part of the business. So it's great to have somebody who is excited and energetic about, you know, really making change, substantial change. And I think you always have your heart in the right place. I always feel like I do too. I just want the best for everybody. And I think you always want the best. You want barbers to feel good about what they're doing every single day. I say this all the time to everyone I talk to, everyone who does hair. I'm like, look, don't marginalize yourself, because my ability to go stand in front of people and do what I do counts on me feeling confident about how I look. So every day when these people go out, if somebody's giving me a good haircut and it makes me feel good in my daily work, if I go in on July 2nd and there's a new price, I'm going to pay that price. So I really appreciate your time. If people have any questions for you, they can put them in the comments. We're going to post this on our social media and on our website. They can also go to the barberside.com website, and there's a contact us, and we will make sure and get that information to you. I'd love to have you back, maybe down the road a bit. Maybe we'll have some healthcare things in place that we're trying to do together. But it's really been a pleasure to talk to you. I always enjoy talking to you, Ivan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime I can be helpful.
Stay healthy.
Stay safe.
Bye, friend.